For me, choosing my favorite match of all time is really hard to do, kind of like trying to pick your favorite child. But when it comes to choosing my top 10 favorite matches of all time, well, that's somehow even harder. However, after all these years of being asked, I think I've finally been able to narrow it down to a list of just 10. Well, sort of. At any rate, that's the topic of this episode, because today... A very special thank you to all my awesome Patreon supporters out there like Tom Hughes, Rodney Harris, and Baba Yaga. Thank all of you so much, and if you want to become a Patreon yourself, then check out my Patreon page, as I really do appreciate all the support. Before we get into the video, allow me to ask that you make sure that you're subscribed to this channel and that your notifications are working. Thank you so much. Alright, first, allow me to introduce to you the rules for this list. Now, number one, this is mostly not in any particular order. While I do indeed like some of these matches more than others, for the most part, a lot of the ones in the middle are interchangeable. And believe me, I did try to rank them at first, but after changing my mind over and over again, I thought it was just best to present to you the list as is. Also, when it comes to these matches, a lot of them are between wrestlers that have faced off against each other more than once. So in order to keep this list from being too redundant, I decided to keep every pairing down to just one example, usually my favorite, although I will probably mention others as well. And lastly, when it comes to choosing my favorites, what criteria am I looking at? Am I judging this off of technical ability? Am I looking at storytelling? Am I looking at excitement? Or is it all of the above? And if so, do each of these values have the same ranking, or are they different? Well, in the end, I'm judging this by which matches I have rewatched the most and which ones have just given me the most overall enjoyment. And yeah, enjoyment is a feeling, and it doesn't really adhere to any scientific method. So ultimately, what it all comes down to is that when I—
What? This list totally sucks!
I didn't even mention a single match yet.
Look at all the WWE matches you have. How quaint. I don't have any domestic matches on my list. All of my favorites are imported.
Can't you give an objective opinion?
Opinions can't be objective by definition.
And just look at the time frame of these matches. You clearly don't know your history. Most of my favorites were even before television.
Then how did you even watch them in the beginning?
Oh, I can't believe that you didn't incorporate this match into your list.
Isn't that
and you
good?
know what?
What you meant to say was
I
that—
also think I could.
Listen, enough of this already. Okay, yes, my personal enjoyment when it comes to these matches is mostly formulated around matches that happened during my lifetime and matches that I had the most access to. And again, also, this is my personal list, and it's not like I could somehow get my own personal list of favorites wrong now, can I? Plus, I also want to point out that having different opinions, no matter what they are, and liking more obscure matches doesn't make you a superior wrestling fan. You're just gonna have to accept that some people have different opinions than you, and that's totally okay. Alright, so now with all that being said, let's just finally get into the list. For those of you out there who know how much I dislike Triple H, you might be surprised to see this list start off with a Triple H match. But even though this did take place during the height of my anti-Triple H hysteria, I have to admit that there was nobody other than Hunter who could have filled this role. This match is a brilliant example of in-ring storytelling, featuring Triple H during his reign of terror going against Shelton Benjamin, the young up-and-comer. I love the back and forth action of this match. I love how they taunted each other, and I also really love that Shelton Benjamin proved that he was nobody to underestimate. And even though Hunter would eventually go and collect his win back, sometimes wrestling is at its best when it's being used to elevate someone, and in this case, Shelton was raised to a platform that not many wrestlers get to see. So it really doesn't matter what would come after this, because for this moment, this match was everything that it needed to be. Kazuchika Okada versus Hiroshi Tanahashi is one of my absolute favorite rivalries of all time. And if you ask me, for my money, I will definitely take Okada versus Tanahashi over any Okada versus Omega match. But hey, that's just me. In addition, it's really hard to try to narrow this down and pick only one bout as their absolute best. But if you force me to, I would probably say that King of Pro Wrestling 2013 would be the very finest for me. Which is not to say that Invasion Attack fact 2013 isn't really close, because it definitely is. Now, if you were looking for some keen visuals for this match, well, that's not going to happen, but at any rate, here we have Kazuchika Okada versus Hiroshi Tanahashi. While it doesn't get talked about nearly enough, one of the absolute greatest rivalries of all time is definitely between Marty Jones and Mark Rocco. These series of matches started off so much of what we love about professional wrestling today: heavy chain wrestling, great technical mechanics, and tight, fast pacing. Mark Rocco and Marty Jones can put on a clinic any single day of the week, and out of all their many matches, it's really hard to narrow down which one is my absolute favorite, so I'm just going to go ahead and pick this one, primarily because it has no rounds, and that's just what I'm used to. And yes, this is a more obscure match that I did discover later in life, but I'm glad that I did. However, I also know that there's probably a lot that I still haven't seen yet, and I'm sure they're also world-class masterpieces as well. I remember seeing this match and being told that Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko were going to be the future of professional wrestling. And while yes, the previously mentioned Mark Rocco and Marty Jones did set the path that would eventually be carried on by Tiger Mask and the Dynamite Kid, an honorable mention I might add, I have to say that Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko took that ball and ran with it like nobody's business. These two master technicians showed how mat wrestling and high flying could all be worked together in one bout totally seamlessly. And while they did have other matches, including some amazing bouts in New Japan and ECW, this was the match that I saw that changed me forever, as I knew after seeing this, I would never be able to watch professional wrestling in quite the same way ever again. The bar was now officially raised, and that was definitely for the better. Alright, when it comes to these two, there are so many matches I could possibly choose from, as I thoroughly loved each and every single time that Chris Benoit and Kurt Angle faced off one-on-one inside of the squared circle. But out of all their awesome bouts, if I have to pick just one, for right now I'm gonna go ahead with their WrestleMania 17 Classic. And the Ultimate Submission match is definitely a close second, as is their 2003 Royal Rumble match for the WWE. You know what? Doesn't matter. Point here is, when it comes to technical wrestling, these two do absolutely everything I love about it. But what I love about this match in particular is just the intensity behind it. The story of these two men finding their equals within each other and both being obsessed with trying to win by submission, but then realizing that they're probably going to have to resort to a pinfall in order to gain victory was just too great of a story for me. Intensity, integrity, and intelligence. What can I say? Kurt Angle is definitely a master of the three eyes. For anyone that ever claimed that ECW was just extremely crappy wrestling and nothing but just a bunch of hardcore nonsense, well, they never saw Jerry Lynn versus Rob Van Dam. Jerry Lynn and RVD showed just how easily traditional forms of grappling could be incorporated with going to the extreme. These two managed to use technical chain wrestling and high-flying maneuvers and do it all under a hardcore banner, while making it look completely effortless, as well as telling another fantastic story of two men finding their equals in the ring. What can I say? I just love that story. And while they've had many bouts and in other companies outside of ECW, I have to say, going to the extreme was definitely their best showing, with Living Dangerously just barely being able to be the best of the best. Well, many people know that SummerSlam hosted the first ever TLC match. Those who are really in the know are very much familiar that the Triangle Tag Team Ladder match at WrestleMania 2000 was the real birth of this particular style of match. The Dudleys, the Hardys, and Edge and Christian put on one of the most brutal showings I have ever seen. Loaded with some devastating looking bumps and some extreme high spots, this match delivered everything that it promised, and then some. While I typically don't go for this style of wrestling, wrestling, sometimes if you dial something to 11 enough, I'm going to have to appreciate it, and appreciate it I definitely did. And while these teams would face off in plenty of other similar bouts, I have to say that I think they got it right the first time, because as good as those other bouts were, the surprise of not knowing how good this match was going to be is definitely something that can't be replaced. Not many people would think to put a Royal Rumble as one of their absolute favorite matches of all time, but I have to say I just really love the Royal Rumble that much, and out of all of them, 1992's was the very best. Even though as a kid, I absolutely hated that Ric Flair won. However, as I grew up, I learned to see the brilliance of this, and that the Nature Boy was an absolute legend, and this only worked to solidify his legacy even more. This was one great story that took place over an entire Royal Rumble, with Bobby the Brain Heenan playing his part perfectly on commentary, and let's not forget that amazing promo at the end. This was the first time that the WWF World title was put up for grabs during the Rumble itself, and on top of that, Roddy Piper was the first man in history to get the chance to win both the Intercontinental title and the World title in the same night, not to mention the ongoing feud between Taker and Hogan. There were so many compelling elements to this Rumble that there was no way I couldn't put it on this list. And I also have to say, out of the very few matches that I had on VHS as a kid, I'm very glad that this was one of them, because there's not too many that were better. And now we're down to the nitty gritty, as there are two matches featuring Austin and Brett that could be considered my favorite match of all time. And believe me when I tell you that it was really hard to try and choose between WrestleMania 13 and Survivor Series 1996 as to which one is the best contest between Stone Cold Steve Austin and Bret Hart. Ultimately, I decided on their Survivor Series 1996 bout, as it is the more technical of the two, and that's kind of what I go for. And yes, I am aware that Bret reused the same finish that he had with Piper during their WrestleMania 8 bout, but you know what? That doesn't make this match worse. If anything, it just makes it better. Oh, and speaking of which, that WrestleMania 8 match is another honorable mention for this list. But going back to Survivor Series 1996, for anyone that thinks that Stone Cold Steve Austin couldn't wrestle really needs to watch this, as it showed how his Smash Mouth style could be used to a technical standpoint to really great effect. And also, Stone Cold's storytelling ability is something that I think is mostly overlooked by many people. And when you combine that with the months of anticipation for this match and for Bret's return to the WWF, it had a lot to live up to, and somehow it lived up to it and then some. And while some people might think that this match ranks so high because it features my top two favorite wrestlers, the reality is that this feud is the reason why Stone Cold Steve Austin and Bret Hart are my two favorite wrestlers, and not the other way around. And number one, while I did say that this list was in no particular order, Mr. Perfect versus Bret the Hitman Hart at SummerSlam 1991, as of right now, is my favorite match of all time. This amazingly classic contest for the IC strap during the biggest party of the summer was the first time that I remember watching professional wrestling and understanding it as it was always meant to be. And also, don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of their King of the Ring bout in 1993 as well. Before this match, I rooted for Hulk Hogan just out of general principle, like a lot of other little kids in the 80s did at the time. But when Bret started gunning for Mr. Perfect's Intercontinental title and declared that he was the excellence of execution, I remember that for the first time in my young wrestling fan life, rooting for someone to win because I believed that they really deserved to win the belt, and conversely that the heel equally deserved to lose the championship. This title, this match, this rivalry has a deeper, more personal connection to me than any other wrestling match I can think of, as this was the moment that I truly got what professional wrestling was all about. This paved the way for everything that I would look for in a professional wrestling match from here on out. Great technical wrestling, a great babyface, a great heel, and no matter how badly WWE would treat this title years later, I would still always hold the Intercontinental Championship in high regard, and I still do even to this day. This was also the first time that I can remember where a match in the mid-card was more important to me than the main event. So even though I had watched plenty of professional wrestling matches before, this is the match that made me the wrestling fan that I am today, and I have Bret Hart and Mr. Perfect to thank for it. Well, there you go, my own personal top 10 favorite matches of all time, but what are yours? Let me know down in the comments, and please make sure that you're subscribed to this channel and that you give this video a big like. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to all my Patreon supporters. And as always, Dave knows.